Support for Disrupted comes from the Connecticut Office of Film, Television, and Digital Media.
Poet Reginald Dwayne Betts was part of a carjacking in a Virginia mall parking lot when he was just 16 years old. He was charged as an adult and sentenced to 9 years in prison. Dwayne was released in 2005, and today he's a lawyer and award-winning poet. He's also the founder and CEO of a nonprofit organization called Freedom Reads. It provides handcrafted bookcases full of brand new books to prisons. For Dwayne and many other incarcerated people, these books can be a lifeline. They can be a connection to the rest of the world. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're joined by Reginald Dwayne Betts. We'll talk about the power of books, his poetry, and life after prison. His books include Shaheed Reads His Own Poem and Felon, which won an NAACP Image Award. His forthcoming poetry collection is called Doggerel. I spoke with Dwayne in September of 2024. Welcome back to Disrupted, Dwayne.
It's my pleasure.
Before we get into the work of Freedom Reads, I want to congratulate you because I hear you are receiving a major honor this weekend. Tell us about this honor that you are receiving in my home state of Virginia.
So the Library of Virginia, which is really dope to me, one, because it's a beautiful space, but also it's weird. Nobody knows what it is. It's the Library of Virginia, but it's this beautiful official public building. And I did my first public reading for one of my first public reads, one of my first official launches for Question of Freedom there. And so I've always loved this space. And I remember, it was Representative Bobby Scott introduced me. It was 200 people that showed up, and I was a kid, It's naive too, right? But this year I got word that they give a patron of letters degree out, and it's the highest honor that they give, and it's sort of like getting an honorary doctorate degree. And so they chose me to get it this year, and it's pretty cool to be honored by a library. You know what I mean? Especially because of Freedom Reads, but also to be a writer, and then to be honored by a library in a state where I dishonored myself and my family and my community. Feels like I'm on a path towards something, meaningful.
Part of that path of meaning is your connection to books and your love of books and your love of reading. You are a poet, you are a writer, but you talk about this connection to books. What was it about reading that made you feel like this is me? This is what I want to do?
Probably, man, it was, the discovery. And I remember my first two literary discoveries. The first was an encyclopedia of sports. And I learned so much. I learned about Gale Sayers. I learned about George Mikan. I learned about Earl the Pearl Monroe, George Gervin. And I would read this stuff. And I'm in the second grade. I would read this stuff in books and go practice it on the playground, literally, I could call to mind some of the moves right now as if I saw these players actually play, and I didn't. And the other book was it was called Illusions by Richard Bach. And I was in my mom's room one day looking for Christmas gifts or something, and the book just fell off a shelf. And I just thought it was hidden in her closet. It must be an adult book, and I read it, and I got hooked on all of this dude's books, and all of the different writers of that same sort of genre. I remember once being in prison, and you talk about the magic of books. My aunt Violet, she had sent me a book, or gave my mom a book to give me, and it was in the same vein of these joints, which was really, I don't even know how you would characterize it, but it was this, spiritual kind of novel. It was like you could become the thing that you want to be in the world and get peace by just finding some inner, peace, right? Which is probably a great book for a kid on his way to prison. But anyway, man, I remember I was in a jail, and I got this book, and I opened it, and I swear 24 four-leaf clovers just spilled out of the book, And so for me, books have always been magic because, that one book was about, illusions. It was the adventures of a reluctant Messiah. And it had these ideas in it that, it's just nice to believe they might be true, which is that you could imagine the thing you need in the world, whether it's bread, whether it's, fish, whether it's peace, that you could imagine it. And if you could make it tangible, then you could make it appear. And man, I read that book and I believed it. Now I get that it's not true, but the idea that you could believe it for a second. And for me, the idea that the book that told me that thing then became the book that I opened and a dozen 4-leaf clovers spilled out in prison, in a place that there is no nature. All of that ends up being why I do Freedom Reads. Because the delight of finding the 4-leaf clovers in a prison cell was not just about the 4-leaf clovers, but everything that was missing in a prison cell. And that's why books mean so much to me. Because books, they concede that they offer you the opportunity to reach for some of the stuff that's missing from your life. You might not grasp it, but at least books give you a chance at reaching it. And if you're in prison, sometimes that's your only way to reach for the full bandwidth of human emotions.
I think it's one thing to be in a space like prison, where, as you said, there is not nature. There's not the same level of connection and imagination. It is a very particular experience to do that as a young person, as a teenager who is still on this journey of figuring out who they are, whatever that means, and the ways that books can provide comfort, but also imagination. At the age of 16, you were tried as an adult, sentenced to prison. You talk about this book that your aunt sent to you. What did books mean to you more broadly in that environment as you were going through, but also the ways you were able to learn with and from people as well?
Yeah, because, the first answer would probably be like, what I learned in the books I read. But nah, man, like that book I'm talking about, see, what happened was I was in a solitary confinement at the juvenile detention center because of my charge. I was in a single cell. It wasn't really solitary confinement. And I would sneak a book into my cell. And man, a guy saw the book I was reading. And he read books like that. And we became like, not friends, but he would give me my headphones at night so I could listen to music, and then wake me up and take them so I wouldn't get caught, wouldn't get in trouble. Like the book made him see me differently. The first conversation, man, I'm still friends with some of these dudes, man. The first conversation that I had, I went to the Jumu'ah service because the Muslim brothers were they and the brothers that were like in the Nation of Islam and 5%ers, they carried themselves with a kind of intelligence that didn't always bear out, but it was. I needed this sort of discipline, and I needed the idea that you could stand up in the world as if you mattered. And I remember going to the Jumu'ah service to learn more. And we were reading something in the word that nobody knew was chastity, And I was like, I know what that means. And I had an identity just for being smart, And even I got my high school diploma. I got locked up at 16, was in 11th grade, but ended up having 11 credits, enough credits to graduate at the end of the 11th grade. But it was all because of books. I had a conversation with this woman, and my whole relationship with her became about the books that she gave me to read. So I still remember me wanting to read Sophie's World, which is a philosophy book, and her giving me Sophie's Choice, which is also a philosophy book. And remember going from Styron, Sophie's Choice, and I hear all the critiques of Confessions of Nat Turner. But what people forget sometimes when they make critiques of a book is that every reader isn't them, and every reader isn't as sophisticated as them. So I read the Confessions of Nat Turner as a teenager in a jail, headed to prison, facing a life sentence. So when I say the penitentiary is not slavery, I'm not saying it because I'm trying to make some argument with people. I'm saying it because I know the pistol landed me in prison at 16 years old. And I'm saying it because of how ashamed I felt to actually fully discover the burdens of slavery. And how I discovered the burdens of slavery literally at a moment that was juxtaposed with me discovering through fiction the burdens of the Holocaust. And so, for me, books have just literally always been the catalyst for me having a relationship with people in the world. It's literally been a catalyst for me, like repairing the relationships that have failed. Because if I didn't repair it in life, the few that have failed, I've tried to repair them in print, or at least say something that says something about that desire. And that might not be for the person who was a friend, but at least it's for the universe, you know, so that I'm trying to add something to the universe in the same way that those books added something, you know, to my understanding of what it meant to be me in the world.
You're listening to my conversation with poet and Freedom Reads founder Reginald Dwayne Betts. Coming up, Dwayne talks about going to law school and realizing that he didn't want to become a public defender. This is Disrupted. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. Today we're talking about the power of the written word with lawyer and award-winning poet Reginald Dwayne Betts. He's founder of Freedom Reads. It's an organization that provides bookcases full of books to prisons. The Disrupted team recently spent some time at the Freedom Reads headquarters in Hamden, Connecticut. On State Street, there's a brick building that looks like your average office, but inside, that's a whole different story. In one room, there are 3 bookcases filled with books along with a bench. It's what Freedom Reads calls a freedom library. Each one holds 500 books, and they've been placed in prisons across the country. But the real magic happens in the workshop. The room is long with high ceilings, and there are workstations along the wall. Michael Byrd stands at one of them, alongside his fellow craftsman, James Flynn. They're sanding would-be bookcases with electric sanders and sandpaper. Michael is shop assistant at Freedom Reads, and like many of Freedom Reads employees, he served time in prison.
I'm doing a lot of things that I never thought I could do. First of all, making furniture that's beautiful. I never worked with wood before.
The Freedom Libraries start as simple slabs of wood. Another woodshop cuts the slabs into the parts that they need and brings them to Freedom Reads. Employees like Michael then sand the wood and assemble the bookcases. Next, they sand the outside and route the edges. The last steps are oiling the wood to bring out the color and adding legs and book stops. The result isn't just a bookcase, it's a work of art. The Freedom Reads team not only builds the libraries, they also bring them to prisons. And while building them is emotional, returning to prisons is emotional in a different way for Michael and other members of the Freedom Reads team.
In the beginning, it was difficult, being that I was a youth inside of prison and growing and going through a lot of struggles. But now that when I do go back, I see myself and I could speak to somebody because I could relate to what they went through.
Returning to prison after being incarcerated can be difficult. But for employees like Stephen Parkhurst, they can find real meaning in the work. He's the communications manager at Freedom Reads and spent 30 years in prison.
The folks to see like one of their own kind of getting out and to go, no, hold on a second. What you do is travel the country and you go into prisons nationwide and you bring books and libraries into these spaces. How many prisons have you been in? And to date, I've been in 43 prisons in the 2 years that I've been home.
For Stephen, books were essential when he was incarcerated.
Prison is relentless. And it's the space that is constantly pushing back on you. So you have to push back with equal force. And books gave me the momentum. Books gave me the strength to push back on that relentlessness.
One of the craftsmen is James Flynn. He was incarcerated when he was just 20 years old. And back then, he felt like there were empty places inside of him.
I've been stocked on a shelf in Amazon. I'm just a serial number.
But like Stephen, books were a way for James to fill those voids. He read a wide range of genres during his time in prison.
You know, I don't know how to be a husband. So I'll grab the Harlequin romances and I'll read them.
One of the goals of Freedom Reads is to help people feel seen. It means something that the books are new and the bookcases handmade. To date, Freedom Reads has opened more than 400 libraries.
You know, you're not forgotten. Oh, look, these people are taking their time out. This was created for us. This business and this idea was to build libraries so I can have a book every day. That's deep. That's deep.
Many thanks to Freedom Reads and the team for letting us spend some time at their workshop. Lawyer and poet Reginald Dwayne Betts started the organization back in 2020. I asked him to tell me about the decision to become a writer himself.
I just learned that when you make a marking, a line, it's drawing. And even writing is drawing. And we recognize hieroglyphics as drawing, but we forget what drawing is, which is a way to communicate visually to the world. I remember when I had to send my stuff to the Connecticut bar examiners after, signing up for the bar exam. They wanted all of your criminal records, right? And I remember finding my confession, and all of it is embarrassing, except my signature. The signature says like, this dude thinks that he is going to be somebody, and it looks close to how I sign my name now. And what happened was I got sentenced to 9 years in prison. And I had always wanted to be an engineer. I mean, I had taken Fortran, Pascal. I was in discrete math. I was taking intro to C++. I just loved books. I never imagined being a writer. And growing up poor, lower middle class, where people just have jobs. They don't have things that they are, Even my interest in programming and stuff was like chasing some girl, trying to impress some girl, And then I got into it. I was good at it and I liked it and I started studying it. But I just said I wanted to do that because that is the only thing that I had a foothold on that I could name. Like, I want to be a computer engineer. Then I get to the jail and I get sentenced to 9 years in prison. And I'm in a holding cell. And I was just like, man. I must be a fool. I said, what am I going to be when I go home? I was like, I can't be an engineer. I'm going to be a writer. And the maybe the tragedy of it all, right, is that the greatest gift incarceration gave me is the knowledge that, like, I can make a decision, man, and literally have no resources at that moment and invent the things that are necessary to make it happen. Because, I said I wanted to be a writer when, like, I should have been thinking about, like, how I'm going to get free. I should have been thinking about an appeal. I should have been thinking about my own safety. But in the face of complete disaster, I chose to dream. It's wild.
How do you allow yourself to dream in a context where so much of it feels like the antithesis of dreaming? How are you able to do that?
Yeah, it's weird though. You say so much. My homies like lived their whole life in prison, and I think you work really hard to make your life as robust as you possibly can, no matter where you are. And particularly if you felt guilty. Somebody mentored me in prison. Somebody said yes to me in prison. Somebody granted me mercy in prison. It was, the ability to dream was predicated on the fact that everybody around me was dreaming. Some of them plotted just as much as they dreamt, but everybody around me was dreaming, just like everybody everywhere is dreaming. And so, my biggest struggle post-incarceration and even in prison is like recognizing what it means that, like, you don't get all the best of it. And you really don't get to demand all the best of it. And you survive in prison. Once you understand that and you figure out what it means to fight for what you could get, then, like, you kind of stop thinking that it's like, woe is me. But the problem is, man, when you come home, You think you survived this. And you did. And people tell you stuff like, yo, you did your time. But you learn that that's like asking somebody to be finished with their memories. You know, it's like, no, you did the time, but it's still gonna linger. And it lingers in ways that you don't know it's gonna linger, but it also lingers in all of the known ways that your friends, your peers, your employers, and definitely the larger society will, like, you know, hold you to account for. And part of that you accept, right? But even in accepting part of it, you always asking yourself, does this mean that I don't get to be? And you can't even name the thing that you want to be. You know what I mean? It's like, it seems like, you know, you don't get to be what? A human who has a struggle and a particularly set of unique ways because of what you did. Yeah, you do get to be that. But still something feels so unsatisfying about that real desire to have a different set of priors that give you a different set of, like, nows. And I actually get how profoundly absurd that sounds. You know, I mean, literally, I teach at Harvard University. Like, I have nothing to complain about.
I'm listening to you talk about that. The very last thing you said, I have nothing to complain about. And I think that comes out of this weight, I imagine, of you now are not just carrying your experiences, your hopes and your dreams. There's so many people who project their hopes and their dreams onto you. This idea of he did it, right? He went to law school. He's teaching at Harvard. And carrying that weight means there are very few spaces for you to just be. It makes me think, Dwayne, about this project that you have now created called Freedom Reads, which is creating spaces and opportunities for other people to pursue freedom, to define freedom on their own terms. How do you carry that weight of the tremendous opportunities you have and the reality that at the end of the day, you are still Dwayne, who's trying to find his way? How do you balance those roles that you have?
I mean, it's not that hard, seriously. And part of it is just because, like, somebody said, well, you're a lawyer. You went to Yale Law School. Look, man, I couldn't get a job. I was desperate. I was applying everywhere. And I applied for a Radcliffe Fellowship. I had no business applying for one. I was a really young writer. It was a mid-career fellowship. Hail Mary, I get the joint. I'm there. I'm still applying for jobs. Can't get an interview. I mean, there is a fine institute here in Connecticut that has given me an honorary degree, and I could not get an interview. And, you know, and the thing is, there are 1,000 reasons why a person doesn't get interviewed. But when you can't get a single interview and you're a convict and you published 2 books and you got this fancy Harvard fellowship, you can't help but to think it's because, you know. But then I'm there and I see somebody at the law school. And when my friend asked them, this is a black woman, says, my friend says to this woman, what made you decide to go to law school? She said, I got my MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop and I figured I wasn't finished with school. So I decided PhD in English or law school. And I said law school. And I swear, she shrugged her shoulders like, and I said law school. And I thought, I'm going to law school. If she could just make a decision like that, I am going to law school. I came home that night and I told my wife, you know, I'm going to law school. And she was like, since when you want to be a lawyer? And I was like, you know, all the time. Now, I never wanted to be a lawyer. But I had took a paralegal course in prison because somebody asked me if I went into McDonald's and I slipped and fell and they had one of those yellow tort signs up, could I sue? I mean, had one of those yellow caution.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, did I get hurt? And he was like, yeah, you got hurt. You broke your leg. For 45 minutes, we argued. And then he pulls out a yellow torts book from under his bunk. I didn't know what the word torts meant at the time. Torts is the legal word for injury claims, right? And he pulls out the page that shows me that you can't sue if the sign was up warning you. But what's the problem with this scenario? You can't ask me a question that you know the answer to and then argue with me for 45 minutes about that answer. I was so mad, me and this guy, get arguing, and I'm so mad that I just picked up his magazine. I was like, you know what? This is my magazine. I'm reading it. It was Prison Legal News. I see an advertisement for the Blackstone Paralegal course. I said, man, I'm taking this course. Nobody's ever going to know more about the law than me. So I take the course. So now I know a little bit about the law. So when you fast forward 15 years later and I decide to go to law school and I hear her say that she just decided to go, I mean, I am just deciding to go, but I got some law in my past. I wrote a habeas corpus when I was in prison. I got somebody 5 years off of that sentence, but I had never imagined that I could be a lawyer because I was in prison. Why would I think that it was possible to be a lawyer? Happenstance. Then I end up getting into Harvard and getting into Yale. Freedom reads. I went to Yale Law School, finished Yale Law School, realized I couldn't be a public defender because I couldn't deal with all my clients going to prison. And I couldn't deal with the fact that like the front end of the justice system is not about, sadly, a mass of people who find themselves in handcuffs and desperate to change their lives today. I lied for 3 years when I got locked up. The other day I was in a courtroom and a prosecutor said to some kid, "Why are you lying to me?" The kid is facing life in prison. I will lie to you for him right now. And so the thing is, I realized that the people who I wanted to work with who were drowning in prison would never have a lawyer because it ain't no post-conviction relief like that. But I needed a job. And I started having conversations with funders and somebody asked me, like, what would you do if like money wasn't the constraint on like your goals? And my answer was freedom reads. But again, every single time I was in a position, and I am extremely grateful and humbled by all the blessings I've had. And so I don't want to sound like I'm not grateful, but it's sometimes like strange when you know your life has been like 4th and 20. Every single time it has been 4th and 20, because you feel like like the dude that keeps chasing the thrill or something. You feel like the person that can't settle down because to settle down is to I was going to say to settle down is to be free. Yeah, you got to have permission for that. So now I know. It's a line in Sula, though, when somebody says, who gives you permission to be so free or something like that? It's Marla Jane's favorite line from Sula. I wish I knew it exactly, but a character asked this woman, what gives you permission to like be who you are in the world? And she says, like, permission from who? Ever since I heard him say that line, I think about it all the time because, I feel like we live in a world where so many of our desires get constrained by who we imagine we need to ask for permission.
What's the permission that you give yourself in this moment to be free?
I haven't slept in like 2 days, and I give myself permission to sleep when I feel I need to. I give myself permission to like actually to weep every day if I want to weep every day, and to acknowledge that if I spend 8 hours where I'm in the deepest, darkest depression over the course of a month, that I should still be grateful for the fact that I did 8.5 years and have never in prison felt as bad as I feel some days now. And I'm gonna give myself permission to accept that, when my bones were stronger, my mind didn't let me be burdened by weeping. And now that my bones, a little weaker, and my mind got to carry more of the weight, it's like, all right, I'll take the sort of stress of the weeping, you know. It's almost like when I was in prison, my body carried all of it, you know. It was like something like a billion push-ups, you know, and I learned how to sort of try to carry all of it in my body. And then you get out of prison, and that kind of intense physical activity like disappears because the world enters. But the need to try to like dissipate some of that thing that you carry, the burden, the shame, the guilt, the, you know, memories, right? You need something to help you ease it. But you get out of prison and you went in at 15 and 16 and you haven't built up any of those tools to figure out any of those things. And so, you know, you meander along, and that's what I felt like I did. I sort of meandered along, and I probably found all kinds of different ways to cope and different vices, and even like success became a vice, you know. And then I think I got to the point where I needed some space, and that's what pushed me to figure out what I needed permission to do. You know, when my body was demanding the weed, you know, when I was like, I mean, I started biking at like 3, 4 in the morning, you know. And I realized, I mean, at first I go out at 5, terrified because, you know, it's pitch black. 10 minutes, come back in the house. Then I go back 15. Then it's 30. You know, then I'm going out at 4 because I'm out for an hour. Then I'm going out at 3 because I'm just up at 3. And like for the first time ever, I'm sleeping. Even if I'm getting up at 3, I'm sleeping. I'm going to sleep at 9 o'clock, wake up at 3, up from 3 to 9, you know, whatever. And it started there though, because I would be on the road just silent with music and like the animals. And it's a different kind of recognition of the everyday landscape that you live in. And it helped me realize that, you know, you live in an everyday like psychic landscape too, and you don't like notice it because we don't have quiet time. So like I was afraid that I was going to get lost, and that's why I would turn around because I couldn't even read. I'm mostly blind anyway, and I couldn't read the street signs. But it turns out like if you know a neighborhood, you know it, but you learn it. I mean, I learned it in a profoundly different way on 2 wheels. And I realized that the other thing I learned is that in the same way that I was learning that neighborhood and solitude, I was tapping back into a kind of solitude that saved me in prison. Solitary confinement is horrific, but for a kid who it was like information overload and my mind wouldn't stop running, you know, it was something about the solitude that allowed me to settle into all kinds of things, from books to ideas of myself to sorting out, you know, random things that was going on in my head. And that's what I did on the road. And I think that's probably why I started getting up earlier and earlier, because I couldn't call anybody. Nobody's going to answer the phone 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. You know, even when you call people in other countries, they don't answer because they like, that's a butt dial. There's no reason that, why is he calling me at 3 in the morning from New Haven? This is insane. Dwayne wouldn't do that. So then, you know, I learned to spend more time by myself, and it was almost like reinventing the wheel, or at least adding some more spokes to it, or taking some out. Probably taking some out.
You're listening to my interview with Reginald Dwayne Betts. Coming up, Dwayne describes reading poems to strangers he meets in New Haven. This is Disrupted. Stay with us. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're talking about the written word with poet and lawyer Reginald Dwayne Betts. He's founder and CEO of Freedom Reads. It's an organization that provides handcrafted bookcases to prisons. Some of Dwayne's poetry comes in the form of redaction poems, also called erasure poems. Redaction poems are created by taking an existing piece of writing and blacking out or redacting words. The words that remain are a poem. Dwayne creates some of these poems using legal documents. His work Redaction was a collaboration with artist Titus Kafar. I asked Dwayne to tell me more about his redaction poems.
Yeah, I was in class, man. I was in this class, and the professor said, law school is where poets go to die. And this was one of my first legal writing workshops. And it was tongue-in-cheek. It was just a joke. And it really was a joke because he's a great writer and a great legal writer. He argues that legal writing should be good. But when I heard that, it created a tension in my head, and maybe it just created something that it was just nibbling and gnawing at the back of my mind. And so years later, somebody gave me these lawsuits where the organization was suing municipalities and cities for incarcerating people and not letting them out on bail because they couldn't pay the bail or they couldn't pay like traffic tickets and fees. And so we talking about crimes that weren't jail offenses in a parlance of, the criminal justice system. It wasn't robbery, murder, rape, assault, things that you knew somebody was likely going to get some time in jail for. This was things that you would not go to jail for. And so he was basically creating debtors' prisons. And I thought these lawsuits were revolutionary. And then I realized as I read them and I wanted people that I know to read them, that nobody I knew wanted to read an 80-page lawsuit. And I thought if I changed this into a poem, then I've done something. And I started to redact it. And the only rule was that I had to keep the words in the order that they appeared, but I could redact as much as I want. And I redacted as much as I needed to create 4 or 5 different poems from this set of lawsuits. And then I worked with Titus Kafar, brilliant local cat who got an amazing film coming out called Exhibit and Forgiveness. But in redaction, what we did was, again, representation. These class action lawsuits come out of a million voices and a million faces and a million names. And so me and Titus, we created these prints that included a double image of men and women, and then also included the text silk screened and silk screened on to create a kind of forceful making visible of not just the faces behind these cases, right? But the literal work that it takes to make the stories known. Like the process that we went through, I think is a metaphor for the literal work that it takes not to be forgotten. And also visually, it says something about the literal work that is required to really see our stories, even in the official documents that are meant to make our cases. Because the original document, before the erasure, before the redaction, and actually I like to say redaction instead of erasure. And the reason why I like to say redaction is because it is a legal technique and it's typically meant to say this is above your pay grade. And I'm trying to argue that all this other stuff is superfluous. What matters most is you said you can buy your freedom, $40 per day, cleaning the city, blood and feces from jail bars. Like that's what somebody said, And it's most important to capture that. And I think that's what the poems do. And the images work in the same way, forcing you to work and hear the stories and recognize the work that it takes to see the people, behind the struggle.
Talk to me about your new project that's coming out in March of 2025. Talk to me about the project and the significance of releasing it at that time.
Yeah, it's funny because I didn't know I was writing a book. And I think that's the best books that get written. But also, 2 things happen. In Doggerel, well, first in redaction, I was asking myself, is it possible as a poet to choose the emotional experience you want the reader to have? And I was writing these poems in redaction for a friend of mine that was dealing with cancer. And I said that I would write poems for chemo because I just didn't know what else to do. And because I was writing for somebody that was going through something, I would have poems that ended in some dark twist. And I started to notice how like it was something in my body that was shaping the words in a way that kept me going down a dark alley. And I get it, dark alleys are significant. They are important. But one of the questions in our life period is, when do we lose control over the world that we want? See, this is why Illusions even comes back, because Illusions fundamentally was about the fact that you can control where your mind goes. And like as a writer, I hadn't thought about this. I love Felon. I love Shaheed. But when I wrote Redaction, I was writing those poems. I knew that I was trying to communicate with one person who I wanted to experience joy in the world. And that changed how I was thinking about everything in my own life that I experienced and chose to write about. And so then, I started struggling with depression and I stopped drinking. And, when I stopped drinking, I started losing weight. But the thing was, I was never really an alcoholic, although I drank every night. It was just because I just didn't want to sleep. And PTSD, my mind racing, having like never been, I don't know what it was. Or it was 1,000 things. And it was so many things that like beg you to be diagnosed, but every diagnosis that somebody might give you is belied by the fact of your success. And so people don't even believe the diagnosis anyway. You know, you almost have to be a failure. This is the dilemma of being a black man in America, right? A successful black man. And I actually don't even want to say it because it seems like saying that is even another excuse. But I swear to God, sometimes it feels like the only way you could get help is the crater. And the problem with that is the only reason why people loved you is because they imagined that you were perfect. And so soon as you do something that's like no longer perfect, you offend somebody, you insult somebody, you weep in public, you just wait. So you get afraid, right? And you don't know that your work is enacting that fear, even if it's doing something else. But focusing on somebody else let me get out of my own spiral, I guess. And I wrote some poems that was lovely that ended up in that one. And then we got a dog during the pandemic, and I just started, like, these poems just started coming, you know. And I went to Italy, and more poems started coming. And the next thing you know, I mean, I was writing poems that was like dripping with joy. And I had never done this before. None of my books had I done this. I started reading poems to strangers. And I mean, somebody's listening to this. I live in New Haven. You know, somebody's gonna say, I know that guy. He read a poem to me. No, seriously. They're gonna be like, no, for real, honestly. We were walking up to the top of East Rock Park. It was 6:30 in the morning. The fool was riding a bicycle. And then my dog scared him. And then he read me a poem. And then somebody else is gonna be like, I was in a cafe over there in Westville. Now, I don't know why he thought I wanted to hear his poetry. But I'm a priest, so I had to say yes. And he read me a poem about St. Julian. Who would have thought? A black dude in New Haven is writing poems about St. Julian. I was in my doctor's appointment just like 2 weeks before that. Read the same poem to a nun. I was like, yo, you got to hear this. I read a poem. I was walking out of my apartment. Read a poem to a neighbor. 5 a.m, he just walking his dogs. Never in my life. I read a poem to a woman on a plane. And then I read a second poem to her. And then she said something about prison, right? She asked me about prison. And I started talking, you know. And then she told me that she had like a nephew or something that had did like 20 years in Angola. And I told her about Freedom Reads. And how, you know, some cats work with us. Quarter century in Angola. I'm on a plane that somebody else booked it for me. I got a great executive assistant named Darlene. So it wasn't booked at the last minute. If I would have booked it, it would have been booked at the last minute. But I am on a plane headed from some city that I can't even remember back home. And I get into a conversation with a woman just because I read her a poem. And I say, yo, I bet your nephew know my man. And when the plane lands, she texts him. And he knew both of the guys. Now, the brother I'm talking about that works with us, his name is James Washington. Freedom Reads was his first job out the penitentiary. I remember he had a birthday. He said, yo, can we take more freedom libraries into Angola so we could put libraries on the cell blocks where I grew up? And I mean, and the thing is, even in my own head, you asked me what was different about this new collection of poems. And now I'm telling you a story about James Washington. Because the poems have opened up kind of relationships and experiences and like joy with people that would have never existed before. And the interesting thing about it though, right, is what I learned in these poems is you could write in a way that touches joy and sorrow and laughter. And sometimes, at least me, I have been more able to do that when I was more willing to weep because the weeping allowed me to really, it made my vision a little bit more clear, you know, and I could see the world a little bit clear. And these poems reflect, I mean, it's the first time I've written a book that I feel like, you know, if I tell you to read it, I'm not wondering if you're going to be sad, you know, and I'm not obligated to make people happy, but so much of my life is dripped in prison, and I want to believe that something can come out, because the book is also laced with prison, but it's just not sad though, you know. Yeah.
I wonder if you are willing to share anything with us.
Oh yeah, I read Bike Ride because it's funny. Like I told you that now I could ride 50 miles. You know, I mean I've been up for like 30 hours, but this morning at 2, I got restless. I went and got on a bike and biked, you know, 9 miles. I biked for 50 minutes, and so that's who I am now. But this is back in Italy, and you'll see, you know, the transformation, and I find it fascinating because I don't know if I would have been able to have this personal transformation if I was watching it as acutely as I would have to notice when I went from the man in this poem to who I am now. Bike ride. Returning from a gravel path, I ride a bike with my oldest boy. And this is where he learns how the body fails you. Each time I pause, he asks if I'm okay. And I say yes, and climb back on the bike as if I believe I won't falter again. I know I will. The ride no more than 2 miles along an Italian road, but so much more than my body can take these days. We've been searching for a haunted house, and I should admit that my son don't like birds. But when I found this abandoned church and hundreds of wings turned it into a scene from Hitchcock, I wanted to share that mixture of joy and fear I felt. I imagine he knew. Mostly, I wanted to be close to him in a way that my father has never been to me. Biking to that old church, we were interlopers and discovered barking that wanted us to take leave. Particularly the Gandalf looking like little mutt in our path. Makai would have tangled with the beast to save me, I know. And as we ride and I stop, he asks if I'm okay. I don't know what it means for a child to see his father weep, but know what it means to be saved by a son.
Reginald Dwayne Betts is a poet, lawyer, founder, and CEO of Freedom Reads. Thank you, Dwayne.
Thank you.
Disrupted is produced by Kevin Chang Barnum, Robin Doyan Aiken, Meg Fitzgerald, and Meg Dalton. Visuals journalist Ryan Karen King also contributed to this episode. We'll have a link to the work of Freedom Reads on our website. You can find it at ctpublic.org/disrupted. And you can also find photos from our team trip to Freedom Reads via the website. You can also listen to all the previous episodes of Disrupted by finding us wherever you get your podcasts. And you can listen to new episodes every Friday at 9 a.m. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown Dean. Thanks for listening.